Hello and welcome to my contribution to the inaugural GibTalks, a little tale I'm going to call "A Work is a Curse." Now this is very unusual for me. Normally when I talk about philosophy. I continue to feed my strong interest in this academic subject. I particularly enjoy reading authors with audacious but well-argued views, those with an original agenda. So imagine my reaction when Julian said, on inviting me, that talks had to be non-academic and that speakers refrain from pursuing agendas. So although I've been told to steer clear of Plato and Hume, I'm going to use a simple philosophical idea to launch into my main topic today, which is a brief and selective history of my experiences in the world of work. The phenomenon of work is of vital interest to philosophy. After all, humans by and large will spend a large proportion of their lives engaged in some sort of work. One result of this, say thinkers, is that work to an extent defines who you are. It fixes and molds your identity. How common and yet depressing it is for people to ask you, just seconds after introductions, so what do you do? In essence, they want to know not what your job or position is, but what and who you are deep down. Now, if all this is true, I wonder what one could make of some of the first jobs I had whilst I was studying in London. If work fixed who you were, and your job was boring, worthless, or just crap, what did that mean for your poor existential self? Talking about the existential self, the first job I had was an absolute classic. Even Sisyphus, if given the chance to take it on and give the boulder a rest, would have politely declined. I signed up to a temping agency. These agencies plonk you anywhere where there's a temporary gap to fill. I was living in Watford at the time, and Watford's one of those places where unremarkable companies have their headquarters. Not cool companies like Apple or Rolls-Royce, but entities like Mothercare, and the place they plonked me, Europcar, those of car hire fame. The department I worked in, just for a few months, was the insurance claims department, where I used to put in a 4 or 5 hour shift every morning. Now, perhaps you don't know this, but this is the department where people deliver the unpleasant news that the Renault Clio you hired for 4 days in Biarritz is actually going to cost you an extra £1,000 because a subsequent inspection detected 5 tiny scratches on the paintwork. I don't know whether it was because of the disagreeable nature of the job, but there was always an atmosphere of misery as I walked in at 9:30. I was a true outcast. No one spoke to me or even looked up from their screens, which are surrounded by towers of paper. Yes, paper everywhere, and that's why I was there. The day's paperwork, issuing from around 30 staff members, would be dumped into a large plastic trolley, and I would spend most of my morning sorting it into alphabetical and then numerical order. Then each claim folder would have various arcane and frankly unnecessary subdivisions. The filing cabinets, arranged across 2 aisles, were like the grotesque metal coffins of fallen giants. Clearly, many people had scratched or otherwise damaged their hire cars. So I would trundle along on my office chair on wheels, placing papers into the correct files, files into the correct folders, and then folders into the correct cabinets for 5 hours. After a few weeks of this, I remember that one day I slowly opened one of the floor-level cabinets, gently placed my head inside, and thought of nothingness. Now, the trouble with this sort of work is that your mind starts to cling to anything which might be of interest, but which, strictly speaking, is none of your business. So I would find myself reading some of the claims, angry letters from customers, enraged replies, scrawled on dirty paper, people threatening legal action, violence, and then Europcar's measured corporate responses. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't interesting as such. It was just a distraction from the soul-destroying repetitiveness of the filing. So that was Europcar. My next assignment came as an emergency request from the temping agency that I fill in for a newspaper vendor who had unexpectedly fallen ill. I thought, this is more like it. My own little stall, shouting out the day's headlines, reading the broadsheets during the quiet hours. Perfect. How wrong I was. Instead of my imagined ideal as a knowledgeable purveyor of quality news, I had to set off in the freezing cold at 5 in the morning to some remote commuter village on the outskirts of the Watford sprawl, which in itself is bizarre because Watford is a commuter hub, so this was a suburb of a suburb. And once I arrived at the station, I had to stand there selling, of all things, the Daily Mail. Morning, mail, sir. Daily Mail for sale, anyone? I called with some desperation as the commuters pushed past me on the way to the train. Some people told me to F off, or told me where to stuff my Daily Mail. Clearly, this area was not quite the right demographic for this particular paper. I would have said it was more of a Financial Times or Telegraph sort of area. But perhaps that's why they needed someone standing there, thrusting news of cancer scare stories and vampire migrants under their early morning faces. This was a front line in the battleground for newspaper sales, and I was the unwilling private, pure cannon fodder in the freezing ticket hall. Thankfully, the vendor recovered, and I went back to other varied and wonderful postings across Hertfordshire after just a few painful and embarrassing mornings selling the mail. I recall that when the commuting rush ended and I cycled back home, I used to treat myself to a restorative mug of tea and a bacon sandwich and try to get some philosophy work done. Which takes me back to my opening thought. If where you work makes you the individual you are, what did these jobs say about me? I suppose, given that they were thankfully temporary, they had no wider implications for the state of my everlasting soul. But what would it mean to be someone who did these jobs for life? I shuddered at the prospect. While the jobs themselves might not say anything of any depth about me or the person I've become, their transience says a lot about the changing nature of work in the modern world. I envy my parents' generation and their job-for-life mentality, but at the same time value the freedom that comes with trying different things out. One of the last things I tried out before I settled into slightly more normal employment is worth mentioning briefly. You know when you walk in the Oxford Circus area amid the commuters, clueless tourists and religious nuts, there's a species of street harasser who shoves leaflets into your hand promising a makeover or a photo shoot. Well, I wasn't one of them. I was further up in the sinister hierarchy. It was 2006. I had just completed some postgraduate work and desperately needed some money. The deal was this. The leaflets invite you to enter a competition where the top prize is a professional makeover and photo shoot. Now, the marvelous thing about this competition is that everyone wins the top prize. It's unbelievable. Where did I come in? I was holed up in a basement with a huge pile of leaflets containing the hopeful participants' contact details. I would call them up, feign enthusiasm and joy as I announced that they were the winners, and try to book them in for the makeover and photo shoot. Congratulations, you've won a photo shoot, Miss Jenkins. And it was a scam. Of course it was a scam. In order to book their slot with a makeup artist, the victims had to hand over their card details, and a small deposit was taken from their account to reserve a place on this exclusive list of clients. Then, when they finished the photo shoot, they were presented with dozens of beautifully produced photographs and placed under immense pressure to purchase a set, which normally retailed for several £100s. Even if they didn't purchase any photos, they rarely got their deposits back. I wasn't present at the stage, but I knew that was the aim of the entire sordid enterprise. The money was good, I must say, but I soon started experiencing a feeling of dread every time the point in the conversation arrived when I had to ask for people's card details. I knew the whole scheme stank, and some of that stench was beginning to rub off on me. So to conclude, maybe calling work a curse is an exaggeration. I think Philip Larkin's characterization of it as a toad is an equally valid attempt to capture its nature. Larkin writes, "Why should I let the toad work squat on my life? Can't I use my wit as a pitchfork and drive the brute off? 6 days of the week it soils with its sickening poison, just for paying a few bills? That's out of proportion. Work squatting on and squashing one's life like that, like a fat, immobile toad. Yes, I like that. So how are we to face the curse or the toad? This beast has to be endured with strong black coffee and plenty of dark humor. It may keep you away from doing things you really enjoy, like Larkin said. It's out of proportion. It's a scandal. Nevertheless, I'm mostly happy it's there. It keeps us sane, gives us some balance, keeps our feet firmly on the ground. I didn't quite have the same understanding attitude when the 5 a.m. alarm went off in Watford, but then again, we can never really tell how our various miseries and misfortunes will one day become anecdotes fit for the first GibTalks. Thank you for listening.